Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Chan, and I am the Assistant Dean of the Program for Faculty Development here at McMaster's Faculty of Health Sciences. I'm really excited to have this amazing studio audience, can I call it, joining us today, but for a very, very awesome set of speakers. We're going to basically be running a panel discussion about what health professions assessment looks like in the post-COVID era. So I'm really excited to introduce 4 really amazing speakers. The first 3 are presenters that are going to be presenting some innovations or some of the thoughts and things that they've been working on. And the 4th person is our discussant, and I'll kind of take you through it. So first I'm going to welcome Alana Bayer. Alana is here from the Learning Technologies Lab, but she's also a major teacher in the Anatomy Lab, and she is awesome. I will have her take the camera over in a second. The next person after that I'd like to welcome is Dr. Jason Perfetto, and he's one of our undergrad administrators and leaders, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. He's admissions director right now for the undergraduate medical education program here at Michael G. DeGroote School of Medicine. And the 3rd person is someone that I think is currently not on the main stage right now, but he stepped away for a second, Matt Sibold. He is one of our program directors in the cardiology program, but he's also one of the adjunct scientists with me at the McMaster Education Research Innovation and Theory Merit Unit. And then our discussant for today will be Dr. Sandra Montero. And Sandra is one of my colleagues who does a great job at being able to pull things together and really see the forest for the trees. So I've asked her to be our discussant. She's also a psychometrician and assessment expert, so she's a natural fit for discussing this topic. I will highlight that tonight we are in a very strange time right now. With the COVID pandemic, what we know is that nothing is the way it was before. And so I know that right now there's a lot of tension around whether things are going to stay the same or going to be different. We're not sure. And so none of the panelists nor I actually have gone to school for fortune telling. So we don't know what the future is going to look like, but we're here to pontificate with you and archive some of our thinking and share some innovations that we've done in the early phase of things. And so I do want to highlight that although we want to do and engage in evidence-informed or evidence-based education wherever possible, right now in today's climate, there's probably no great textbook or best practice answer right now. We are still innovating and changing right now. An example of that would be taking a look at the most recent kind of publications out of the Medical Education Journal, which highlights a bunch of adaptations and changes that have happened since the post-COVID or in the post-COVID era, or since the pandemic started. So definitely check that out for inspiration. Tonight we're doing like a live version of that, where we're going to have these educators and scholars share their innovations, and then Dr. Montero will take us through a discussion about some of that stuff. So I am going to stop the spotlight on me, and I am going to hand over the spotlight to Dr. Bayer. So Alana, I'm going to put you on the spotlight.
Great, thanks Teresa. All right, let me just get the screen up. So what I'd like to share with you is our assessment challenge that we faced in a large undergraduate anatomy course when we had to do that rapid switch to remote learning that happened. And traditionally, as probably many of you know, that the anatomy and physiology courses are usually run in an in-person formation, where we have live lectures, we have face-to-face tutorials, we have face-to-face lab components, and we have face-to-face assessments. And so the timing of our switch with remote learning required us to look at how we were going to deliver the final assessments for this course. One of the things we were faced with was that our final assessment is worth 50% of the course, and as a result, we, as a course, did not feel comfortable just assessing students on their work to date and sort of calling it a day. So our team took a look at how could we deliver an assessment in an online format for a traditionally in-person class. So our final assessment has actually two different components to it. One is a multiple choice exam, and the second is an objective structured practical examination, which we refer to as our OSPE exam or bell ringer exam. And this is a timed exam. So if you can imagine a room with 30 desks placed in a circle with specimens on each of those desks, as well as a set of questions, that is what students rotate through during the OSPE exam. So multiple choice exams, similar to deliver in an online format as we do face-to-face, but the OSPE provided an additional challenge for us. Some of our key areas for concern around running an online assessment was around academic integrity, around the specimens that we would use for our testing, and the technology. And I'll be going through each of these areas of concern and how we address these as we thought out how we would deliver the assessment. So first, dealing with the academic integrity concern. So on the left is a potential student exam setup. And this was actually from a Facebook post that was spotted at McMaster, with students showing how they prepared or plan to take the online exam. And so when we saw this setup, knowing that we are not set up at McMaster University for remote proctoring, we were very concerned about the academic integrity of any exam that we would administer. And so this led us to explore remote proctoring. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with remote proctoring, it is when we use a third-party software that can lock down the browser of the students. And what it enables us to do is have the students not navigate from one tab to another, so not having a Google search open while they're trying to write the exam. They're locked down to only the exam on their screen. There's also a webcam component, so it is monitoring the students' movements, whether they're moving their head back and forth, if they're looking away from the screen, so perhaps looking, as illustrated in the picture on the left, other monitors or perhaps other communication channels that they have with other students. And it also has an authentication aspect where students can, through their webcam, hold up their identification card to identify themselves and authenticate them in terms of writing the exam. Our issues around the remote proctoring were that there's a cost associated with it. Our institution is not set up with an institutional license for remote proctoring. And we were excited about the possibility of using this and trying out the technology at the time, because companies were offering this for free as a result of the COVID situation. What we found, though, when we started exploring this further is that the company that we were looking at exploring with was still in the beta testing phase, which made us a little anxious to be able to use this tool with any certainty with our students that we wouldn't have failures of the test in terms of its delivery, in terms of students being able to take it, what the output of the exam might be. So we decided at that time we weren't willing to risk having more anxiety around the exam situation. So we decided not to do the remote proctoring for the exam. The second issue that we were dealing with is that students learn from the materials that are in the lab. So they're learning primarily from three-dimensional specimens. They are learning from images in their lab manuals as well as in the lectures. And so when we looked at what specimens we would use for the online exam, we made a decision to go with the two-dimensional versus the three-dimensional specimen images that we had. And one of the reasons pushing us towards the two-dimensional specimen images is that to view the 3D specimen images that we have, you would require 3D glasses. This would add on an additional layer for students because they would have to now make sure that they had 3D glasses in order to write the exam. So right here we had an issue potentially with the students being examined on different types of materials, in this case the 2D specimen images, than they were used to learning from. We did have a large data bank of images, and so we were able to provide this to students so that they could have some practice time before the exam. There was also a bank of practice bell ringer questions, these timed questions. So students would have the opportunity to practice looking at specimen pictures and being able to identify the image and write test questions on it. Our third key area of concern was around the technology itself. And so we looked at different technologies. One, as I mentioned before, was with the remote proctoring, which would have required us to use their system to administer a test rather than our course learning management system. We decided, especially as we moved away from the remote proctoring option, that we would stay with our course learning management system. We were already delivering quizzes through our learning management system on a weekly basis for their lab component. So students were already familiar with what a quiz looked like in our learning management system. And we wanted to reduce the anxiety and stress that students were feeling, especially given the uncertain situation that was going on. We ran a number of pilot tests on how we were going to actually create this test in Avenue to Learn. Typically what happens with a bell ringer test, the way we run ours, is that each station has a specimen with associated questions. Each station, students have about 1.5 minutes to 1:45 seconds before a timer goes and they move on to the next station. What we had envisioned was that we could do a timed bell ringer online exam where we would have each question timed. And that once that time elapsed, the students would move on to the next question. What we found though, and a challenge for us, was that with the technology we were using, we weren't able to individually time questions, but we had to instead time the overall exam and give a guideline to students of approximately how long they should spend on each question. Where this could be a potential issue for students is that self-monitoring of time that they would have to do during the examination itself. The third aspect that I wanted to highlight around the technology component is that we ran mock OSPEs. So what we did was we took a bank of around 5 questions that would be similar to what the students would see on the exam, and we ran a stress test, both for students and for the system. And so we offered the test at the same time of day that we were going to be offering the final exam, and we ran the mock OSPE for the same time period as well, and we had over 300 students log on for the stress test. We have about 400 in our course who are going to be taking that exam. And the mock OSPE allowed not only a test of the system itself to make sure we could handle that number of students on, but it also allowed us to troubleshoot for any technical difficulties that the students may have or technical difficulties on the side of our learning management system. The third aspect was that it provided some exam familiarity to the students. They could see what it would be like to go through an online timed bell ringer exam in this learning management system. So our overall experience with putting the bell ringer online was that we did have security issues, or we suspected there were a number of security issues. We had a high degree of suspicion that there was student collaboration occurring during the exam. And where we looked at and where we came to the realization of this was when we were marking the exams, we found that there were a number of responses to exam questions that were a correct answer, but were answered for a different question. And so just to add in here, we had actually randomized the questions for our exam. It was from one set bank. All students had the same questions, but they were in random order. And so what we suspect is that there possibly were groups of students who were communicating together. Perhaps one was taking the lead saying, this is question 8 and this is the answer for part A. And as a result, without maybe looking at the picture that the questions were relating to, students were putting in the answer for part A based on what another student's answer was for their question 8. There was a high, in terms of reliability, sort of 3 aspects that I'd like to focus on are the exam itself, that there was the same difficulty level for all students in the course. We had the same questions for all students, but we randomized those questions. And so this is different from some examinations where you may have a very large bank of questions and then you randomize within that bank. And so individual students may have a different set of questions from each other, which may vary in difficulty. One of the reasons for our course we didn't have a high degree or high number of questions in our question bank was that we felt that once our questions were posted in the online format, that students might be taking screenshots or doing some other capture with the exam questions, and those would no longer be questions that we could use at a future time. We know students in our course like to collaborate with each other and create, if possible, exam banks, and so we were trying to keep our questions down to a minimum number for our exam. With the technology itself, we had very few technical difficulties through our mock stress test, which we actually ended up running 3 different times. We only had about 5 or 6 students on the day of the exam having technical difficulties. And we were able to reopen another version of the exam later that afternoon and have everybody finish on that same day. And then in terms of grading, we actually were able to export all of the data, all of the students' answers into an Excel spreadsheet, which we were able to divide up among the faculty. And we all met online to do a group marking bee, where we could come to consensus around the responses for each individual question. And so we had reliability in how we were grading. In terms of practicality, we found delivering this exam in an online format was really efficient. From a time standpoint, we had everybody run through the exam within about an hour and a half time, and that's including the extra time that was given for students with accommodations, where they have increased time to write the exam. The effort involved in comparison to our in-person anatomy exams was significantly reduced, as well as the cost. We didn't have the same setup or the requirement for maintaining the specimens during the exam time, both and all the way from the pre-exam time to the post-cleanup time. The exam itself in an online format is easy to create. It was easy to deliver and reproduce. And the reproduction is of note to us because we always have a number of students who defer the exam. And so since it's easy for us to reproduce it, and we do have extra questions we can draw on, we will be able to reproduce the exam when it comes time for those students to write the deferred exam. And it was also easy for us to be able to grade it as a group together. So our key takeaways from this experience is that really having similar learning and exam material is important in preparation for the students. It reduces their anxiety and stress around what they're going to be tested on and their preparation for that test. And that's a key feature that we're going to take forward as we plan for a potential online fall delivery of the course. Using familiar platforms and tools. So if you are going to be introducing any new tools, so if we do decide to introduce remote proctoring at a later date, then making sure that we test it with students before it's the final exam period. Opportunities for practice, so where we had the mock OSPE for testing, as well as practice bell ringer questions. Technical support all the way through from setting up the exam through to the day of the exam, when we had our instructional assistant on for technical support throughout the exam in case there were any immediate issues during the exam. And remote proctoring I've put as a question mark. We are still exploring that as a possibility to address our concerns around academic integrity. And I will turn it back over to Teresa. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Excellent. I am going to now invite Dr. Jason Profetto to present. So I'm going to put the spotlight on you, Jason, when you put your camera on.
Thank you. Can you see me now?
Yes. And
okay, I'm going to try and do this, and hopefully it works. Teresa, does that look okay so far?
That looks good to me. I'm going to make you put the spotlight on you. There you go. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to try and speak shortly because I'm going to limit this to about 7 minutes. And the reason I say that is because I'm going to be talking about something that our admissions department did that I literally could spend hours discussing and describing. So my name is Jason Profetto. I'm a family and academic doc, and I am the chair of MD admissions at McMaster. We also did a bunch of stuff related to the OSCE in our undergraduate program, but I wanted to focus on what happened with some virtual challenges and the changes to our MMI. So, and Teresa, as I move up, everyone can see that, I think, right? I'm not in an official part. Okay. So McMaster Admissions, just a quick history. The MMI, the multiple mini interview, and CASPER, which is the computer-based assessment for sampling personal characteristics, also known as situational judgment testing. Both of these things were actually designed, developed, and produced in-house at McMaster. So I think it's only natural that we were waiting for the next innovative change and and something that wasn't going to be super commonplace, something that was going to shake the entire history of admissions in Ontario. So generally what we do is a multiple mini interview before we offer our applicants admission to our program. Our MMI is a 10-station MMI. It is considered high stakes. If you do well, generally you get in. If you don't do well, generally you don't. It is summative in nature, so it's purely based on actual numbers and scores. And what happens at McMaster is we have over 5,500 applicants each year to our medical school. It's one of the highest numbers in the entire continent, North America. And then there's Formula One. So that's where you get 1/3 based on your marks, your GPA, 1/3 based on your MCAT, specifically the CARS, also known as the old verbal reasoning, and 1/3 based on CASPER, which is considered a situational judgment test. From there, 550 of the applicants are invited for an interview. And what we do with the interview is we change the formula. So after the interview, the offer of admissions, the actual rank list, is based 15% on the GPA, 15% on CARS, and 70% on the actual MMI. This year, we had some challenges though, because with the COVID, we actually had to cancel the MMI. We were not allowed to do an in-person interview. Now, the challenge, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, is that both in Ontario and in Canada, McMaster was the only school that had not done over 500 interviews as at the timing of the COVID cancellations and social distancing guidelines. So we did have to cancel that. That was a very unique scenario for McMaster. Other schools had decided to do different things like virtual options, virtual MMIs, Zoom, Cura Talent, and different things. So what did we do? We wanted to do a couple of things in our innovative role. So we knew we couldn't do an in-person MMI. We really wanted to adhere to the principles. So we have some geographic allocation in terms of Ontario and out of province. We have some very important metrics of merit. So the GPA, CARS, the CASPER, and we also have a modifier for individuals that have had a master's and PhD completed. It actually serves as a small little bonus. We wanted to be evidence-based. We really wanted to stick to our science and know that what we were doing was rooted in evidence. We wanted to be as fair and equitable as possible in our change. We wanted something that was feasible and implementable at the time of the changes happening. And we wanted to do something that was generally reflective of the process we already had in interviewing our applicants and offering admissions. So what did we do? We ended up going with an actual lottery. This got a lot of attention, and a couple of pieces of clarification. This was not an open lottery. It's not that 5,000 people applied. We spit them into a random selection generator and chose the top 200 students. That is not what we did. This was an active selection process. That means in order to be invited for an interview, you had to have a certain GPA, a certain MCAT, and a certain CASPER score. So the individuals that were invited for an interview was only 10% or less of the entire applicant pool. This was a multifaceted process that ended in an actual lottery. But the thing is, we didn't want to make it, even at this stage, a purely open lottery. We wanted to do a lottery that was reflective of the probability of getting in. Our local research shows that the top 100 students on the interview rank list have a very strong probability of getting in after the interview. So that is to say, the top 100 students that are invited for an interview generally do not shift their place in that actual ranking, which means the vast majority of these students actually still get in. So what we ended up doing was offering, the first thing that we did is we have an equity stream for, we have an equity stream for our Indigenous applicants. And we first made those offers to the Indigenous applicants. Then we decided to offer the top 100 students on our rank list an offer of admissions. And then the remainder of the individuals, which was several hundred, were actually randomized through a lottery to receive the remaining offers, to be put on a wait list, and then a certain amount towards the bottom of that lottery were actually given rejections. Those who are not successful in receiving an offer of admission this year are automatically invited back. Should we do an interview next year, whether virtual or in person, they will be automatically invited back next year. This actually gained quite a bit of attention. So there was an article done through CBC. This was spun a little bit. McMaster University to use a lottery to decide the fate of about 430 medical school applicants. And you can see the subtitle, "Students Furious Despite School Insisting Random Selection Isn't an Open Lottery." The Hamilton Spectator also did an article which was a lot more balanced and fair. And then it was interesting, there was a lot of different themes that were circling online, and this was from a bunch of different students, or a bunch of different applicants. And we were getting a sense of what the actual applicant pool and individuals outside of the university were thinking. And I mean, pardon some of the language in here, but this is the actual organic stuff that was appearing online. Who cares how you got there? You're in, and that's all that matters. If you get into med school, you deserve to get in. The admissions process isn't perfect, so it doesn't matter whether you, quote, deserve to get in or not. And some argue that it wasn't the best solution, but it's also not terrible. 4 years of hard work are not wasted. You will, at worst, get an automatic interview next year. The 300 people who have gone rejected post-interview are incredibly lucky. The med school admissions in Canada, once you have attained a certain standard, are already a lottery. And this is just removing the veil and being a lot more honest. There is a sense, too, that there's a significant amount of implicit bias within an actual interview process. This is an area now of great debate. And the one country that has been using law for decades in a variety of ways is the Netherlands. So we actually went to their literature as well as our local research to get a lot of this information. And other people commenting that that med admissions are always a version of a lottery, but just usually people have a semblance of control. And there is this interesting thought of agency and whether or not you truly do control what happens in an interview and whether or not you actually deserve to get in. I'm gonna, for time's sake, I'm gonna end it there. This is a topic that we literally have spent hours and hours and hours on, and happy to answer any questions or provide more clarity. And I'll stop it there. Thank you, Teresa.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing that idea and the concept with us. I'm going to invite Dr. Sibold now. Matt, if you can turn on your video, and I will make you, let me just see. There you are. I will make the spotlight go on you. There you go. Excellent. Okay.
Well, thanks very much, Teresa. And very interesting to hear the evolution of medical school admissions. I think my first foray into what virtual assessment was actually as a student. I did a course-based master's program, and all the assessment was remote proctoring. And I saw a lot of the securitization that Alana was talking about. We do this elaborate dance before every scheduled exam where you would take your iPhone around the room and show every corner to a proctor that I think was in India, who would have eyes on you and be listening for the 2 hours or 3 hours where you did your exam. You'd only have one monitor. And some of the exams were open, some were closed. There was randomization, there was sampling of questions. And this was all pre-COVID. So it's amazing where we've come. I also have a perspective as a sim center director. So we've seen the physical sim center shuttered in the COVID era. And now we're on online platforms like Zoom, where we've got standardized patients. And today we were running a sim with cardiology residents, where the cardiology residents were at home, but we had the high fidelity mannequin and we were going through scenarios. What I hope to touch on today was actually in my role as a cardiology program director, as part of a national cardiology exit exam. It's really done for formative purposes. And this is put on every year across the country by a national body with an interest in helping people prepare for their penultimate exam. And typically we've got 60 or 70 trainees who fly into a hotel near the airport in Toronto, and 25 or 30 faculty members and we run an OSCE over 2 days. That happens in March, and it was certainly not going to happen in this March. But amazingly, we managed to make it go virtual. And so here's sort of what it felt like. An ECG is up, and a trainee would say, if you're used to looking at ECGs, this looks like left ventricular hypertrophy. And then I'd ask, so what do you want to know about the patient? And we'd continue in a dialogue that resembled a short case in a Royal College station. We see each other and have a discussion. I'm sharing my PowerPoint slides that have a little bit of case material, some images. Here's a echo image. And I've got a Google Doc with an answer key that I'm gradually checking things off as trainees are going through the station. 10 minutes, and then 2 minutes for feedback, and then switch. And in the background, we've got a very, very busy Saturday with lots of Zoom meetings that start and stop on a clock. And we're in a separate meeting every single time. This took quite a lot of coordinating to set up. It was nationally coordinated where each of the faculty members in this 2-track 10-station OSCE were given a free Zoom account, and all of these meetings set up ahead of time, and all of the trainees emailed ahead of time with all of their stations for that day. And it certainly was exhausting. This is a picture of all the faculty members at the end of the day. It does look like we're smiling, but it was tough to get through. Most of us had 30 candidates. I think we learned a lot of lessons. Usually when you plan an OSCE, you've got time in between. You figure people have to move from one room to the next room. And we didn't think that you needed virtual time, but I think virtual breaks and a virtual transition is really important. We recognize the importance of having a second platform for communication. And so we were all on a WhatsApp group to keep us constantly on track and updated. And there was technical support for trainees or faculty who got left behind. One thing that we didn't touch on was dress codes for candidates. And we saw all sorts of things, including doing an OSCE from bed at home with a t-shirt on. And maybe that should be an advance warning for trainees taking an online type of virtual assessment. And certainly it was far easier after going through different renditions of how to do this as an examiner, having an e-checklist in a form or survey format to easily keep track of what was going on. Questions in our mind when we finished this was how to stay in sync. You know, what happens when a candidate enters 5 minutes into a station that's supposed to run for 10 minutes? How do we handle that? Do we speed it up or try and move them along? Recognizing that there's a schedule that you have to follow. How do you catch up if the whole track is delayed? And then how to keep this secure. I think we echo some of the uncertainty that Ilana was talking about. How do we control the environment? How do we control how trainees discuss and are sequestered from each other through this process? How do we keep the content of the exam safe? And it was a very interesting experience, and I can imagine we'll see much more of this ahead. So thanks very much.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the spotlight. Okay, and now I would like to invite Dr. Montero to take the stage, and Sandra's got her video on, which is awesome. I'm going to spotlight her video, and she's got her awesome headphones on and everything, so thank you. All right, and again,
okay.
While Sandra's talking, if you have questions, please go ahead and type those right into the chat, and I will read them like a great radio host that I probably should be. All right, so we'll have Sandra take it away from here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, everyone. I want to particularly thank the 3 speakers that were invited to share their experiences today. They were all hand-selected, certainly because they are experts in their field. Many of the decisions that they made around the examples that they shared are driven by their background in education design, scholarship around assessment, and teaching and learning. So I think something there to pay attention to in terms of why they were able to make the decisions that they could. As Teresa mentioned early on, this might seem merely as a show and tell sort of this is what we did last week, or just sort of examples that may not relate to others. We hope that you do see some alignment with your own work in your own contexts. Certainly a guiding principle in any education, research, or scholarly endeavors is to try to go beyond developing something that only addresses your local needs. Try to create lessons that are generalizable to people within your province, country, the world. And I think we'll see that as more and more of these examples are shared, you will certainly see how the 3 stories we heard today can be generalizable to anything from tests in an undergraduate program to very high stakes licensing exams as well. I wanted to also talk about the fact that none of the 3 examples shared today were previously intended to be online exams. And so it's really interesting to see how they've sort of navigated some of the challenges. They all shared their concerns around the fairness to the students themselves, the perceptions of validity for the exam and the results and decisions that are made from the exam, the challenges of dealing with large numbers of students and faculty and resources and timing. And so it's really great to see how they've overcome some of those. The common elements that everyone, or rather problems that everyone tried to solve, included test security, test fairness, and realism of some of the test materials and managing that. And I know anecdotally that the participants, the trainees involved, have commented. Certainly it was surprising to hear that the postgrad, even at the postgrad level, that some of the trainees found the experience to be quite realistic. I do want to take things back to Dr. Perfetto just for a little bit and ask him to share a little more in terms of some decisions that the undergraduate medical program have made, because I do know that there are plans to conduct virtual online assessment similar to an OSCE in the coming months. And if there's, if he's willing, maybe just sharing a couple of points around that, some considerations and some design decisions that that are in front of you.
Jason, you can go ahead and talk, and the camera will flip to you.
Awesome. Can everybody see me? All good? Okay. So, sorry, I am okay right now? Everyone can hear me?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So for the undergraduate program, we normally do 3 OSCEs. We have 200 and change students, so 203, 4, depending on the year, each year. So generally what we do is we have in-person OSCEs, 3 in total, 1 at the end of MF4, 1 at the end of pre-clerkship, and 1 at the end of clerkship. Now, we had to cancel the one in April, which is the one at the end of clerkship, obviously, because it was right in the midst of the social distancing COVID issues. And now we have our inaugural first-year OSCE coming up. We have agreed to do the OSCE virtually. And the thing is, when you look, a couple of things I'll quickly say, and again, I can do a couple of hours on this, but the first one is when you have 200 students that normally all do 10 stations, that normally all have standardized patients in them, if you look at the amount of administrative logistics that you have to juggle, the Zoom meetings, it ends up working out to a tremendous amount of nitty-gritty scheduling, organizing, time slots, so on and so forth. So we are going to be going with a software platform that it hasn't been fully decided yet, so I don't want to say too much about that, but it's going to allow both synchronous and asynchronous options, virtual rooms and non-virtual rooms. Dr. Sibbald was talking about some of those simulations with ECGs and echocardiograms. We may be doing something similar, obviously, for pre-clerks, medical students at a very rudimentary level. And you know, Dr. Montero and I have really been going through the different concepts around psychometrics, the sense of face validity, ensuring reliability, how many stations do we need, etc., and whether or not this continues to be called an OSCE or something else. So we are going through right now as we speak a virtual transformation for the OSCE? And maybe I'll pause there.
Thank you for that. I wanted to make sure that our audience was aware there were also those innovations being considered. I can appreciate that you don't have details to share with everyone right now. Before I hand it back to Teresa, and I know there's some questions building up in the chat line there, but the reason for the webinar tonight was to disseminate some of this knowledge, share some of these innovations, hopefully empower others to take some of these risks. I think some of the lessons that were shared from both Matt and Ilana are to test run your solution, test drive it, I guess, and see what the glitches are. You know, learning things like warning your students that they should potentially dress up for their interview might be good, so that people aren't all surprised when their student shows up in their pajamas. But good assessment, good education have always been about ensuring that the basics and the principles are adhered to. I think now that we have the basic element of getting together in person and looking the students in the eyes and asking them questions and challenging them in ways that we believed to be realistic, now that that's been taken away from us, I think we have to reconceptualize what our goals are for assessment in this post-COVID era. And I think we've got some great examples before us, and hopefully we can learn from that. But I will throw the ball back to Teresa. I don't know if you want to read out some of the questions. Certainly there's a long lineup of them.
There is.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let people, if you have questions, maybe you can write them down right now. What I would suggest is that all the speakers and the panelists right now can turn their audio and video back up so that you'll float to the top there. And I'm going to start with a question that I had for Alana, actually. Why did you choose to only do the OSCE exam instead of doing like a regular multiple choice exam? Like, what was behind that kind of thinking?
So from
Alana,
a feasibility standpoint, and this gets, I think, to Yusuf's question that he had posed in the chat. From a feasibility standpoint, the MCQ exam would have been very easy to administer online. Our concerns were really around the student collaboration and that ease of collaboration. And we had a feeling, knowing the practices of students in our course, that very quickly a Google document might get created. As soon as someone started putting up the questions, all they would need to put in was, you know, question 2 answers A, and be very easy to go through. So we decided to do a different type of assessment with the MCQs. We actually moved it to a group assignment and restructured that part of our assessment piece. The OSCE, though, is a different type of exam. It's a short answer exam. And because it's timed, because we randomized the questions, while we felt that there would be collaboration, we thought that the ability to collaborate for a short answer, fill in the blank kind of exam would be more challenging to collaborate on than the MCQ exam. And we also find that the OSCE exam, where they have questions on a particular specimen and have to answer questions related to that specimen, often is a better measure of their understanding than guessing on multiple choice. So which is why we went ahead with the OSCE.
Okay, excellent. The next question is for Matt. Thank you, Elena. Dr. Sibbald, can you explain a bit more about how you use WhatsApp to keep the examiners on track? And then also, can you explain a little bit about what the e-checklists for the examiners were? Like, how did the examinees not end up seeing the checklists?
Right. Yeah, great questions. The challenge, of course, is you've got 24 examiners who are all running a station at the same time. And then what happens if there's a hiccup and they have to restart, or you want to change the timing? And so everybody had WhatsApp as an app on their phone, and we're part of a common group, which in effect is a chat group that created a audible alert when it was sent by the coordinator, so that everybody could look up from their Zoom and their station and glance at their phone and figure out what disruption was amiss. And we needed to use that several times through the day. That was also the starting place and the ending place for the exam as a faculty group. And there was actually a separate WhatsApp group for the trainees so that they could be cohorted. And it seems that no matter what platform we use, even in the sim world, we always need this second form of communication to help coordinate complex groups while they're moving in between bits of the online platform.
Yeah, that's a very cool innovation to just use text messaging. That's so simple, but elegant for sure.
We also became pretty skilled about how you share your screen. And so Zoom and actually many other online platforms allow you to select just one window. Mm-hmm. And PowerPoint actually can present in a kiosk mode rather than a full screen mode. So if you allow PowerPoint to present in a kiosk mode, it will be the full window, but not taking your full screen, allowing you to have other web-based applications or non-web-based applications opened. It's very convenient. We have a Google platform at McMaster through MedPortal, and so much of our academic stuff ends up on the Google platform. And so you can use Google Forms very easily to keep track of trainee responses or student responses, and they're automatically tallied in a spreadsheet, which adds to the convenience.
Yeah, Matt, I would assume that you could also just have a second device, just like you did with your phones. You could have the checklist just loaded up on your phone as another screen as well, right? Or an iPad or something.
Absolutely. Interestingly, you know, this is a group of examiners who are mid, some of them late career. When somebody suggested Zoom, many of them said, "What's that?" They were entirely unfamiliar with a lot of these platforms. And it was amazing how quickly and easy it was to get everybody on speed with a couple of sessions, drop-ins, where they could take their device and figure it out.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it sounds like a lot of the time, like we make assumptions. I think that's what I've been finding in a lot of these webinars. We're making assumptions about generalized populations and who's got what and who can do what. But I think the pandemic has shown us that we can all rise above it if we're given enough support. So I think that's a great take-home message for you to think about. Now, I think there's some questions for Jason around kind of the lottery exam next year and whether there are steps that you would have done differently if let's say we still can't do in-person interviews next year for whatever reason. Would there be anything that you would do differently? Would you change anything?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. I think what I'm going to do is there's actually a few questions here that I can answer all in one.
Okay, there you go.
It's interesting to note, so for McMaster, the current first-year class has been selected through an in-person MMI. The incoming class is going to be selected through a lottery system. And then next year, it is conceivable that the class will be selected through a virtual MMI, which means we will have 3 cohorts at McMaster at one time that have all been selected through different modalities, right? So in-person, lottery, and virtual. It is interesting, though, because when you remove a lottery, when you remove an interview, what ends up happening is the implicit bias is removed and mitigated against, and the probability of increased fair diversity is increased. And there's a lot of different conversation around that. The last point that I will make is that the question is well received. Our interview process, because the top 100 generally don't have a lot of mobility, what a lot of our research has shown is that, but also that the MMI and McMaster actually doesn't predict for much. It doesn't necessarily predict OSCE performance or licensing exams. And this is a lot of research that came out through Merit and our my predecessor, Dr. Margot Mountjoy. So the question of an MMI, ironically, something that McMaster created, is in question at the moment, but that's a big conversation.
And Jason, do you think that's because Casper has come along to also do something very similar?
Excellent. Yeah. So there was a lot of discussion about whether or not Casper, which is online situational judgment testing, should replace the MMI. So the thing is that technically these are different types of assessment. It's likely assessing something that's correlated but different. And we think that from what our local research shows is that it probably predicts different things, although there is some overlap, but they're likely not interchangeable.
All right, interesting. Well, we'll stay tuned for more innovation and scholarship, I'm sure, from your group, because I think that's going to be the way that we move forward, is that as we're, I guess flying the airplane, we might need to report how it's being flown, while it's also trying to be in midair. So I think we're all in that space right now. Matt, there's a question about like exam security from the point of view of the mock orals that you did. Now, obviously yours was a practice exam, but can you imagine if this was the way that you go forward with the real exam? Or something like it, would there be any security issues that you could see, and how are we going to combat some of that? And you don't have to have the answer. I'm just kind of conveying the question here.
We can imagine a future where we might have summative high stakes testing virtually. And how does that remote proctoring translate to OSCE type situations and scenarios? And I can't help but time management and creating speeded assessment conditions are part of securitization in all aspects. And I think Alana was mentioning that as well, as well as randomization and sampling, so that there's a problem space universe that you sample from, but there aren't fixed OSCE stations anymore. There's just a variation around topics. And we might have to be a little bit more free with how we blueprint and sample to increase the security. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be ways around it. And probably there's going to have to be some environmental monitoring that's put into place too.
Okay. Yeah, it might be the spy cam is on or something like that. I think that's kind of where the proctoring comes in. And I think, Elena, the service that you talked about might not be the best, but I think there's lots of innovations that are going to be seen in the next little while. I think there are.
Can I just add before you pick the next question, just since Matt brought up the issue of speeded tests, there, just to point out to everyone, there is evidence that, I guess in the exception of when accommodations might be needed, but for other situations, speeded tests certainly can improve the reliability of the data that you gather. Essentially what's happening is you're pushing the examinee to the point where, you know, if they really don't know it that well, they're not going to be able to come up with the answer with a timed situation. So you're kind of pushing them to the point of having to use knowledge at the expert or more advanced level. And so that's timing could be one technique to get over the security challenge. Because with enough time, they can ask questions of their friends and look around for answers.
Yeah, really kind of getting people into that system one thinking almost like you either know it or you don't, and then if you have to look it up, definitely. I think there are even some open book exams. I think the American Board of Emergency Medicine, for their maintenance of certification exam, so not their end of training exam, but the maintenance of certification exam, they're making open book. So this is every 10 years in the US. As an emergency doctor, you actually have to recertify and do another exam. And so they've made it open book. And I think the timing is that. I mean, if you look across to other professions, the lawyers have had open book exams for 100 years with the bar exam. Like you can bring your criminal code in, you can bring your resources in, because they just set such a ridiculously long exam that if you have to look everything up, you'll never finish it. So definitely there's precedent for that kind of the time pressure being kind of the differentiator.
And some standard findings are that for open book, the exams are actually more challenging. And also when it comes to the time it takes to answer a question, the quicker you are, tends to be more related to getting the answer correct. So if you need more time to think about the answer, you're at that point more likely to come up with the wrong answer.
Okay, so that totally makes sense. And so now I need both Jason and Matt and Alana to all kind of listen in on this question, because I think it's going to be a collaborative answer, because I don't, and Sandra as well, because I don't know that anyone knows the answer to this, but Michelle Murray, one of our program directors here, she works in a procedural specialty, and they're trying to have a technical skills station in their selection process, knowing that CARMS is going virtually next year. It's probably not likely going to be easy to do kind of simulation skills testing, I guess, in a virtual environment. Do you have any ideas on how you could do a surrogate to look at hand-eye coordination or other technical skills? How are we going to crack that nut. I guess, Matt, you're a cardiologist, and Jason, there's lots of procedures that you probably think about in terms of family medicine. Any thoughts on any of those things?
I think the answer here is actually quite easy. I would just do a lottery for all the candidates. I'll let Matt take the first stab at that question.
But do they have to use some technical skill in putting their lottery ticket in?
Exactly.
You know, I think there's some interesting examples outside of assessments about how part test training has been distributed virtually, usually with homemade objects and broadcast over Skype or Zoom. I wonder if actually sending in a video might be one option. You know, suture the orange and send in a video. But the items to use must be easily accessible. And of course, you're going to have to think about accessibility barriers.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting challenge. I mean, I might actually say that maybe this is where workplace-based assessments or something at their home, like kind of, I know that there are some environments where you might do, I know the anesthesia exam, they have their home OSCE station. And then the idea would be that they do OSCEs at a certain time at their home base for their residency program, and then the results are sent off to the powers that be. Could we trust the other educators across in the different centers and say, can you proctor and then attest to the completion of such and such? So it becomes maybe like a scavenger hunt for admissions content. I don't know. This is something that I was thinking of.
I was just going to add to that. I guess the only thing I can think of does come from the education context. There are some really arts and crafts type solutions to practicing practicing some procedures that I just blanked on. Sorry, what's the okay, laparoscopic skills. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, because with laparoscopic skills, the idea is that you're doing something in a hidden space, right? So you're using sort of very fine equipment to go through a hole and beyond which you cannot see. And then also within the gastrointestinal scoping kind of context, moving a camera in a way that's safe, again, without seeing what's in front of you, but you're sort of looking at a camera, a screen or a TV screen that's in another space at the end of the room. And so I could imagine some kind of arts and crafts ideas using your phone inside a box, or you know, they certainly have modified cardboard and plastic tubes so that very novice learners can practice scoping. And so I don't know if scaling that up for an assessment where you've got to do something in a timed manner, as Teresa suggested, maybe putting some recorded sessions together as your portfolio to demonstrate competence in eye-hand coordination type things, till you can get to the real. The Da Vinci robot is the only thing I can think of where, you know, you could demonstrate your procedural technical skill from another part of the world. But until we get one of those in every house, I don't know.
Yeah, interestingly, Sandra, one of the things is that there are some video games that you can purchase that are turn your Nintendo Switch, or it used to be the Wii, into a box trader setup so that you can actually practice laparoscopic skills. And I've seen and played with a couple of them at like the big conferences and stuff like that. Super interesting. Michelle, maybe something like that will come down the chute eventually, but I'm not sure it's prime time yet. And I'm also not sure that it's fair to ask candidates to buy a Nintendo system just to be able to have a couple of sessions. But maybe that's somewhere where Matt and his colleagues from the CSBL might think about capital purchases, so that there might be some sort of centralized resource to do some of this innovation. So definitely something that we can look forward to maybe in the future to see if there's other testing that can be done. I guess there's some questions about, own city, like having testing station in your own city and things like that might be something that could be done. Validation of a local kind of observation. I think physical exam is is a theme I'm seeing in a lot of the comments here. And I guess for OSCE stations, like you could use surrogates like a teddy bear or things like that. And it sounds like there's some innovations around maybe looking at how we might play audio clips of murmurs and say, name that murmur, for instance, for Matt's specialty in cardiology. Yeah, any thoughts on how we might assess clinical skills? And which clinical skills might we best assess in these kind of online situations? Any thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, so this is something that we're actually working on quite deeply right now with clinical skills in the UGME. There's actually some good literature out that sort of analyzes the different clinical skills that are easily testable virtually and those that are not. And so the example that I shared in the group chat is the pillow for the abdominal exam, which actually ends up working out perfect. And if you're inclined, you can even have a pillowcase where you draw, for example, like the umbilicus and sort of like the inguinal areas and the costal region and the sternum. But there are other exams that are very difficult, for example, like a screening neurological exam, unless you have another person in the actual location with you, right? So there have been a lot of different ways that you can do it. The only other thing that I would add, and it kind of relates to the other question, the previous question, is that there's two things. One is that whether or not a procedure or physical examination skill can be done, like by observation. And the second thing is whether or not they can actually articulate and explain what they're doing. And it's kind of like tying the shoe. I think I can tie a shoe very easily and I can show you, but can I explain it? And what are we trying to assess specifically? Because that does matter in terms of how you deliver it.
Okay. Yeah, those are all really good points. Any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, and then maybe just to add, there's the procedural aspect of doing a physical exam, and then there's the cognitive interpretive aspect of how you use and make meaning of that information. And I think it's actually easy to assess the interpretive meaning making of that information online. There's lots of platforms. You can share sounds, you can share sites, you can share videos even of neurologic movements as a way of trying to understand whether somebody understands the significance of a finding. But actually demonstrating the finding, I think, is much more complex, as Jason alluded to.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, I think that's all the time we have tonight. It's been really a pleasure to hang out with all of you. And it's been really, I think, thought-provoking to kind of see all the different innovations that people have been using and all the consideration, the careful thought that people have been using. I'll flag to all the participants, if you're still hanging out with us, I just put in the chat box a blurb about feedback. We've also emailed it to you, but we would love to have feedback about this session. So if you want to click the link and give us just a couple of minutes of feedback for each of the speakers, I'm sure they'd appreciate it. And definitely share your thoughts. We're really excited to have all of you come in from everywhere that you've come from. And really excited that kind of like our local faculty development is kind of going international. So thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. And I'm going to be stay tuned for some of our other events that are coming up. You can check out our website at macpfd.ca. So macpfd.ca, and check out some of the events that are coming up.